So welcome to the CAP Guest Lecture Series. I'm Andrea Swartz, the Associate Dean, and I have a few, before we get to Shannon Nichol, I have a few just notifications. This coming Monday, March 24, we have Emily Rausch Elliott visiting for the CAP Guest Lecture Series to talk about social justice projects in the Mississippi Delta. 1 week after that, on March 31, we have CAP Urban Planning graduate Adrian Scott Fine, who is president of the Los Angeles Conservancy, and he will be talking about the challenges of historic preservations in the Los Angeles community following the fires. On April 14th, for the third annual Whitehead Lecture on Sustainability, Felix Heisel from Cornell University will join us, and that lecture will begin at 5 p.m. All the other lectures are at 4. There will be a reception for the Whitehead Lecture immediately before the 5 p.m. Start. We have AIA and LACES credits for today's lecture. You need to sign up in the hallway and fill out a questionnaire as well, please. So now I will introduce Natalie Yates, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture, who will introduce today's guest speaker.
Layers. Hello, everybody. I'm Natalie Yates, Associate Professor in Landscape Architecture. Welcome. It is sincerely an honor and a privilege to be able to introduce Shannon Nichol, a pivotal landscape architect, a change maker, and founding principal of Seattle-based landscape architecture firm Gustafson Guthrie Nichol, otherwise known as GGN. GGN is recognized for innovative approaches to designing high-use landscapes in complex urban contexts, often revitalizing urban cores through impactful landscape interventions that honor each site's unique identity while addressing contemporary needs. The award-winning firm has accomplished an impressive array of high-profile projects, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation campus in Seattle, Boston's North End Parks, Lower Rainier Vista and Pedestrian Land Bridge in Seattle, and Chicago's Millennium Park Lurie Garden, among many others. Shannon Nichol's work is characterized by deep consideration of how people experience and move through spaces, seamless integration of ecological sensitivity, compelling aesthetics, and creation of places that are both environmentally responsible and beautiful. Her work has played a pivotal role in reshaping how urban spaces interact with their natural and cultural contexts. One of my favorite monographs, GGN Landscapes by Taisa Wei, excuse me, I have it on the corner here, dives into the process of the firm, which is unlike many other monographs that are out there. It's not just about finished products of the designer, but showcases a variety of methods, materials, and stages of design process. Through her works and talks, Shannon Nichol promotes designing under utilized native plantings, growth, and learning through both successes and failures, using backyard test beds and propagation experiments to adjust her approach, collaboration, observation, and the role of drawing in development of design thought. Shannon's contributions to landscape architecture have earned her and GGN significant recognition, including the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Award in Landscape Architecture, National ASLA Awards of Excellence, National ASLA Honor Awards, the Tucker Design Awards, and Edra Great Places Awards, among others. And I wanted to end and welcome Shannon with just a quote from her. GGN is particularly interested in design work that does not bestow a novel layer of design onto a clean slate site, but instead strategically repairs a messy and broken transitional space in the city. Novel solutions can be found by fixing the old in-situ systems and designs of a highly altered site. I cannot wait for this lecture. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Can you guys hear in the back? Okay.
Thank you so much, Natalie. And you can hear me too, right? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. I've had such an inspiring day so far in getting to talk with a lot of you and see what you're working on. The fluency between architecture and landscape in particular is really exciting to me, as well as the maturity in the landscape department in particular. with understanding and embracing multiplicity, and that getting a degree in landscape architecture doesn't mean only one thing, or that you have to get yourself on a single track that looks a certain way. And that's really one of the things that I'm hoping to talk about tonight. My path into landscape architecture was, as I talked about earlier at lunch with some students, it was disorganized, happenstance, and kind of reactive. And I feel really grateful for that, and I try to continue to be open to unplanned opportunities in my life, and I see people here that are already embracing that mindset. The thing that I'd love for some folks to take away from my talk is a reminder, and I am aiming the talk, and we discussed this as I was preparing the talk, I am aiming it toward you, towards students, and also emerging professionals, but the reminder to put your designer hat on when you're in a mode of trying to produce something, or you're working, or you're thinking about what should this final product look like what do professionals do? Even if I can elevate our office to an improbable example, even in an office like ours, we are constantly fighting to remind ourselves that we're designers and that we can approach anything we do as a design task, that not only that we're doing creatively as a firm, but that each individual is an individual designer applying their creative thinking to everything. And with the automation and so-called efficiencies that we have now in being able to do multiple steps in one click, or use a digital template to do something, it's really easy to skip over the opportunities that you have to get your hands on something, to get your brain involved. So I'm also going to be talking about why the inconvenience and vulnerability of doing little hand drawings for yourself in your process can be useful. For me, they're really the backbone of what I do. And I had to go through some cycles as a young professional to realize, I can show these to clients, and I'm not doing something wrong if I do drawings for myself that aren't on the task list that I was given. All right, that was half my time. So we maybe know, GGN, I noticed that the impression of us tends to be dominated by an aspect of our work that I'm still really proud of. We still do this kind of stuff. But the early part of our office, I co-founded it in 1999 with Jennifer Guthrie and Catherine Gustafson. There's actually also a guy initially in there, which people don't know, Chris Overdorf, dear friend, pulled away for family shifting life path reasons pretty early on. But we founded the office really focused on form, conceptually driven form and detailing. I still love this stuff. I also, as we were talking about earlier today, I derive inspiration from all sorts of different forms of design. I'm really interested in car design, for example, and taking information into my mind of why I react in different ways to certain design from different realm that uses hard materials. So some of our projects that really have this approach of conceptually driven landform that might be in more dialogue with architecture than with nature at first glance, or maybe literally, include the National Museum for African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Here, the move we needed to make was basically create a field for this incredible spaceship to land on that David Ajay and his colleagues designed, this Corona. And also that this field would be pulling the regular ground, the main central ground of the National Mall, expanding it, because this was off the edge of the National Mall. But it was really important that this story, the African American story, the Black story of the United States, was on that same central ground that the Washington Monument is. So that meant in this case, we're pulling turf. which doesn't sound very exciting. But it was really important that we pulled that same exact stuff that's around the Washington Monument underneath and around this building. And then there's warping and things to create a sense of anticipation, gateway, enlargement, playing with perspective, and of course building in things like kinetic attack walls and the practical things that we might do. But really the attention being on the monument and the experience inside of the museum. So I'm showing you this group of projects that most people seem to think of us for, and then I'll dive into my flurry of seemingly unrelated stuff that's in the background of all these projects, but also has created another channel of work for us. This is the Sydney Modern in Australia, with Sana doing an expansion. One of our early projects, another Smithsonian museum, it's in the old Patent Office Building courtyard in DC, the National Portrait Gallery. So we're often, and in our early years, we were often focused on the formal and compositional storytelling between layers of architecture of different eras. And we love having to be whatever's needed in the middle or to help people put two things together. So for instance, here we have Foster and Partners roof that was put over this courtyard. Magically, it doesn't actually physically touch that Georgian cornice anywhere, to abide by historic regulations. But then we kind of needed to find, usually landscape architecture is the field that supports the object, or it often is. And in this case, we said, okay, that's the field. So we need to be a clunky other scale that doesn't compete with the historic architecture unless you really focus on that, and lets this roof look very fine textured and continuous in comparison. So we made these big chunky bars of ivory soap, as we called them, that floated across the space as planters. This was years ago. I think we designed this in 2004, 2005. So these early projects are helpful to see as diagrams of where we started, with really focusing on composition and physical design, and how you can tell stories with it through form, scene, body relationship. And then the question is, how do you then push that into doing other things for communities beyond the formal? So we started to get more into public parks and public spaces, and applying the idea of, oh, well, we could look at the history of this public park site in this community and tell that story through a landform that is sculptural, but it's also a park. So that was kind of a new chapter for us when we did, for instance, this is North End Parks in Boston. Now, the form making and the sculptural aspect and the conceptual art branch comes in from my now retired partner, Catherine Gustafson, who was had a huge impact on my training, my aesthetic, kind of gave me a hard knocks education when I started working with her improbably when I was 23. So I'm telling you about this because when I was at your juncture in life, or junction, it's for some of you anyway, I did a practicum, which was an internship-like thing at UW, and I really went to just the first. I was an introvert, wasn't an awesome student. I went to the first firm that was doing restoration work that said yes. And it was a great little firm. We were doing restoration work. And then Catherine Gustafson, this is Shell Petroleum headquarters in France, one of her early projects. She happened to know an architect who had seen my graphics, not my design work. I didn't even know what I was doing at that point with design, but I could draw and do graphics. So I'm telling you, if you have a skill that isn't conceptual design or vision planning, and it seems kind of rudimentary, and you're worried, oh, I don't want to get pigeonholed just doing graphics for someone or doing CAD, that is a valid concern, but I would try to tamp that down, because I think you can miss opportunities to connect with people and collaborate with people. And if you are a curious and creative person with a design mind, they will figure that out when they're working with you doing CAD or graphics. So anyway, you can see also this oven era, like how pure and like there's not a blade of grass out of place on this, right? And at the time, this was astonishing work that Catherine was doing in controlling landform. Meanwhile, I'm in a restoration firm. I'm doing this work, which this was a recent photograph of one of my first projects. And interestingly, I kind of circled back to this in recent years, but I planted a tree that's considered a junk tree in this project, and I couldn't even get like bare root saplings. It's Alnus rubra. It's a little easier to get them now, but this is what the project looks like now, 25 years later. Like 30% apparently of the student body of Ball State in general, not this school, so I don't know what the statistics are for this school, but almost 30% of the Ball State student body are first generation college students. And I got excited when I saw that because I'm a first generation college student as well. So a lot of what the things that I resource as inspiration might not be a childhood growing up around artists or going to art museums. I wish I would have been able to do that, or traveling to European cities. I'd never been on a plane. I'd been on a plane once when we got the Lurie Garden project, and then I was scared to death to go to Chicago, a city I'd only seen on movies. So these are pictures from the house I grew up in. The one on the left is just over the edge of the yard. Miles and miles of clear cuts. I'll talk in a minute about what I learned from that was not irrelevant to what I do, but it took me a while to realize that. On the right is one of the old logging roads that goes through my parents' properties, and they're laced all over the place. And watching those old roads is a man-made gesture that cuts through the topography, and then over time, not much time in that area in the Pacific Northwest, they start growing back in. And there's this magical moment where you can see both things happening. And while it is a cut and it is a damage to the landscape, when you see healthy healing happening, it feels like a positive place to be. And that's also something that I've tried to bring in, that sense of the difference between a fresh cut on the left, which is actually what a lot of our new landscapes look like, by the way, versus on the right. To me, that's a healthy landscape because it's going in the right direction. There's not a square inch that doesn't have something in it, even if a lot of those plants are considered, locally considered weeds, even if they're native, because they're so vibrant and aggressive in recolonizing disturbed sites and roadsides. So the first project where Catherine's incredible land sculpture approach, the meticulousness of it, the subtlety, the sensuousness, that I had such a heavy hand at that point that she really had to be like, whoa, like, tamp it down with the wavelength on topography and things like that. All those things that she brought. She reviewed my work on the Lurie Garden competition entry and pushed me to make it more sophisticated. And that's the hybrid of those things is seen here in our plaster model that was part of the competition. And what we're telling the story here of that site and Chicago. It's about the ambitious upward force of that city, which one of the most beautiful architectural man-made environments on a completely constructed datum that's 8 to 12 feet above the original grade of the city. And then, of course, the importance of the high rise. And the location of this garden is surrounded by the wall of the loop, which has all this incredible, it's emphasized because there's a lot of deco in the architecture, but a lot of verticals that are just pressed up against the glass. And so we said, well, this is on top of a parking garage. Million Park's on a parking garage. And so it's really weird that a botanical garden's up here on this thin plate. It's not even real ground, but that is the ground of Chicago. That is part of the story. So the detailing and the landform, we wanted to look like it's kind of like swollen up, and we wanted it to just be packed with plant energy, which of course Pete Udolph for the perennials collaborated and came through in spectacular ways, as do the gardening teams to this day. They're artists, and they've continued to evolve it. But the idea of this just like packed in energy, which at the time was weird because we were responding to, the competition brief was to do a botanical garden. And our conventional idea of a botanical garden is specimens of plants isolated from each other with labels. And this was just going to be a massive chaos, like just a massive energy coming up. So putting landform together with my, we all collaborate on everything, but this is really in some ways the DNA of our firm, is putting together the conceptual form and the attention to form and storytelling physically together with actually almost like hyper-literal restoration, or I've been in particular been really committed to bringing forth the native plants of each place that we're in for people to see, and then using theatrical, glamorous, formal language to present them, to kind of represent them to people so that they see their own native plants as a show garden. At the time we did this, this was the first major project that Catherine and I did together, which is why I'm showing it right now. It's hard to imagine, but even echinacea was like a radical new plant. Like Michigan Avenue had a few echinacea, and like it was starting to be kind of accepted. But the vibe around even talking about native plants, and especially prairie plants, in a garden setting in Chicago was almost taboo, because there'd been some prominent failures of landscapes that tried to use native plants, and they just didn't have the experience using them horticulturally, so they didn't look great. So thank goodness we had Pete with us, who ironically had been using the native prairie plants in Europe at that point. He hadn't done any US work yet, to a beautiful aesthetic effect. And so putting the ideas together of having down to tiny detail, like the visceral and real truth of each place, which we've veneered over and we've generalized, and we made so many places boring because there's no difference when you go from place to place. Having that combined with formal language and forms that are designed to kind of force you to have a certain experience is kind of the DNA. So you walk in through this giant 14-foot tall hedge, which is kind of like ostentatious almost, right? But we wanted people to think this is like a magic box full of something really valuable, and then they get in there and they're like, what? This is brown in the winter? At the time, again, it was radical, but we were working with somebody who knew how to pull that off. And then you get into the project, you're in this kind of bowl, so it feels bigger than it is, and you feel more contained than you really are. But also, it was really important, we're cropping out the middle ground, those distractions, which are spectacular at Millennium Park, and traffic lights and stuff like that. And we're saying city and land. Like, this is the real place, and the city is part of this story. We're not trying to make you think you're in a nature reserve. And using what is there and allowing people to see it, rather than thinking we had to completely conjure from scratch some spectacular sculpture that had our own separate concept. In my mind, I feel really confident as a designer if I can think of the real story I'm trying to tell, and then how do I bring and help people see something else, not my work. Catherine's a little more like, I want them to look at me, like, you know, so she'll kind of make us do something that brings a little more attention in the forms, which is good. You need a little of that. But yeah, so this is the result. And then another thing that's really important about this project is I've had the privilege of having 20 years of friendship with the gardening team and the curators of the garden director, the lead horticulturalists over the years, and learning from that, and then also just being so eager to apply this to other places. We can do this, but then getting so frustrated that this isn't happening in other places. This being ecological public horticulture that isn't just about the capital project of putting the plants and the landscape in the ground, but it's also about an ongoing program that's experimental. It has to be. Over 80% of the plants that Pete Rudolph put in the ground or designed for the 2004 installation have been swapped out now. This is a different garden because it's been creatively managed. And as we learn more things also about insect habitat, about when to cut, about how different plants grow together, and some native plants that Roy Diblick grew for this that hadn't been, I know some of you in your class are like looking at his work, but some of the plants that Roy Diblick grew for this installation hadn't really been used in a garden setting before. Some of them became superstars here, some of them needed to be iterated and swapped out, or he'd find another sedge that might be better. This was supported because of an endowment from the Lurie family, so it's very idyllic. But I have been really eager to try to apply this process-based approach to landscape to more of my work. So then the next thing is, so that's kind of a basic formula in terms of form and storytelling, and yet not completely abstract and not being afraid to be quite literal. Then we need to add people in. And we always thought we did, but I would say around 2015, we started to realize we're not really pulling people into this. And maybe being introverts, that was also part of our inclination. So then we started thinking, okay, what we're doing, which started with working on these museums, is really we're connecting people to the place. We're using our project, which is there in the middle, and it's some arbitrary excerpt of the greater land surface. But we have what we have. We got to use that to connect people to the whole place and also to each other. And we also want to use the timeline of the project and the process of the project to connect people to each other and the place, which means before we even design anything, we may be having conversations that we would have internally as an office that we didn't realize were actually great conversations to have publicly about, well, what did happen here? What is the real story of this place? What does everybody else know? Who are the folks that use this place every day? And I'm not talking about community engagement. It's really more learning about the project and the site and the community together as a group. That in itself is something really beneficial that all of you can curate in your work. Landscape projects are a great space for that. So I'm going to start, let's kind of jump a little bit then to site analysis. And one of the things that we see a lot, I saw it today in some of the studios, is there's such a wonderful access to information that we have and data and mapping. A lot of the portfolios I see from students are now kind of dominated with by analysis. So there's often lots of beautiful axonometric layered diagrams and all sorts of wonderful data that can be beautifully presented. But what I worry about is that we've become sophisticated analyzers and renderers of data, but at some point we're not sociologists. Maybe some of you are. We're not geographers. We are designing something, and we're also trying to connect with people and trying to help people connect with a place intuitively and emotionally. So at some point, we have to transition from making maps or looking at maps or gathering maps together with our analysis and actually emotionally analyzing and subjectively analyzing. So I love using hand drawings to, sometimes it's just to take the pressure off myself to come up with something profound. I'll just start drawing the site. And this is an example. I'm doing a vision plan for this farm. And there was just this beautiful moment. I didn't even really know why it was, but where big leaf maples are arching over this bend in a utilitarian road that's following an Army Corps of Engineer bank. And doing drawings like this helped me start to realize there is so much there already. And there's a danger you're going to over-design. I don't like that term, by the way, because I've been accused of it many times. But there's a danger that you'll feel the pressure to produce novel design where you don't need it if you don't fill the white space for these places that are already interesting or beautiful or important in telling the story of the site. So this is just saying, in however you do it, maybe it's taking photos. Because I know not everyone loves classical drawing or drawing in this style, but taking a moment to feel creative and enjoy looking at the site and just what you react to emotionally. That's really important beyond the mapping, beyond the demographics that you have to do anyway. The other thing I'd say about this kind of drawing is I was able to show this drawing to the clients, and then that's when not doing something becomes design. Because somebody creative looked at this, reinterpreted it, and then drew what was most distinctive to them about that moment in their site. This becomes part of your design. And I got to do a drawing and I got paid for it. The other thing with site, I really appreciated that. Thank you. I need a little feedback. So the other thing about using hand drawing is it'll get your mind into, like, it'll shift your mind so you can help shift other people's minds. So this is land. This happens to be South Lake Union in Seattle, one of our projects that we're looking at. But it's really easy to forget that this is land because we can only see like one block at a time because of buildings, and it's gridded, and we think of, oh, okay, that's Mercer Street, and then, you know, this is where you get close to the freeway. And so you could just get an old topo map, or you could have somebody grab a topo map off of Google. But if you, in whatever way, just draw the land, like remind yourself, it doesn't mean we think that the 2 blocks that we were dealing with here, where we had this pedestrian street going through an alleyway, we didn't think that we were gonna make this happen. But take a moment to look at this, remind you, what is the land here? What does it look like? And the stuff on top of it's only been there for, you know, well, where you guys are, maybe a little longer, but, you know, a few centuries most of the time in North America. So what is this place? And then suddenly when you look at it, and when you do a hand drawing, you're forcing your mind to put it in to your intuition and your sense of scale in ways that I really don't think, I know it doesn't happen if you just grab a file layer. I know that doesn't happen. I think it's really hard for it to happen even when you're building a digital model point by point. And then the other thing is there's something about a drawing, even if it's humble, even if it doesn't look really slick, your clients will understand, they'll be disrupted a little more looking at this than they will a map, most of the time. Disrupted in a good way, like, oh, I'd never thought of South Lake Union that way. And it will lead somewhere. You don't know where yet, but it will open everybody's minds and you'll get somewhere with it. And then the other thing I like to do in the analysis phase is take a moment to just draw. And again, I put a lot of pressure on myself. I want to just get things done, and I'm excited. And I also feel like it's all on me. I got to like do something profound for this client, or I got to figure out the best whatever, reinvent sliced bread. And if I just relax, and then I use crummy paper. This is mostly printer paper, like cheap paper that you put in a laser printer. I don't even know if they call them laser printers anymore because they all are. But and I use index cards a lot too because they're small. I use the cheap ones from, you know, a drugstore that probably are not acid-free or anything like that. But there's something about using cheap paper and just doing some drawings of like, okay, this is what this site is. I don't know if any of this stuff is actually the most interesting or will lead anywhere, but I try to draw a little summary of like, what do I think about this place? And Why did I drop from this direction? I don't know, but there's usually like some things that are adding up intuitively that start to, for you, something will start to add up about what is distinct about this place, and then what do we want people who visit it to, like what do we want to amp up or help them see so they can see what's distinct about this place and its story. And also for the owners or the community to understand what's valuable and unique about their place, because they can't see it anymore if they're super familiar with it. And then the transition from analysis or site analysis to concept design is not nearly as abrupt or terrifying. I go to a lot of, I don't think this is happening as much here, but a lot of the schools I go to, I see students at the point where, okay, now you must come up with a concept. And there's this moment where, okay, I gotta pick like a reference. My reference is the vase or something, you know, like trying to figure out something to inspire you. And then that's not literally the analysis. And so sometimes it's in a separate column from all the data and the analysis. I think that's really hard. Now, for some people, that may work. For me, it's all kind of a blend of things, and if you put your creative, if you indulge yourself and look creatively at the site and emotionally at it and kind of opinionated from the start, it's not going to be such a jump into like white space when you start coming up with forms. So in this instance, I'm using Oxbow Farm a lot, for example, here. But in this instance, this highway cut through the farm at one point, but the farm was there before, and this was just this like little gentle gravel lane. But highways, being dangerous, noisy, et cetera, they tend to, the land on either side of them tends to look different over time because people just don't, like nothing crosses. And so this is an example, this is so subtle, but it was this first move of kind of saying, I was looking at this view, and then realizing, well, that's funny that the hedgerows don't line up on either side. And that's funny that there's a big leaf maple on one side here, but there wasn't one on the other. Well, what if we, you know, aligned these things again to show that this land was here first. This land was here, then there was a farm, then there was the highway. And is that a beautiful story? Not necessarily. Does it sound crazy artistic? No, but it is the story of this place, and people want to see logical assembly of land that reflects things happening over time. We're wired to do that because it's only been pretty recently that things can be artificially changed so much and not accurately really represent anything in the physical hierarchy. So putting things back, even if they seem like it's not that big of a deal, it can start to get you on the way into design. And this part of our concept for this project then ended up being putting the layers back. It's kind of simple, but it gave us a lot to do, a lot to work with. And then, you know, that putting the layers back or reconnecting things that are broken can be your design. That's a lot of my work. And in the end, it may be detailed in a way that looks like we're trying to be snazzy or something. But a lot of times, we're just trying to, in our minds, we're putting the story, the pieces of the story back in the order or the hierarchy that they should be to correct an imbalance or something broken. So this is Montreal in this great river valley, site downtown. This was for a competition that we frustratingly has almost always got second place on. But one of the things we really work is to help ourselves. I try to help myself imagine what this place really is in full color, not just old maps or like looking at field guides, but like try to find a place when you go visit or some photos that help you imagine or see what it would be in full color. This is the site. It's against a freeway. Freeways are usually where really interesting charismatic things had been happening in the landscape because they were either wet or along the base of a hill. So, you know, this is just simply realizing then as we looked at old maps and realizing, oh, the reason why the freeway is here is because there's this really strange rocky outcrop in Montreal. And this should be a center between this cool old town ridge and this neighborhood, but it had gotten severed because there weren't traffic warrants to have intersections on this freeway or over the freeway. But of course, there isn't such thing as pedestrian traffic warrants, and there should be. So we just, for this park design, we talked about just putting all that back, so this doesn't feel back end and back of house and unpleasant and in a pit, and instead it feels in a center of something where things connect, and where a really interesting moment happens topographically. That's a really common theme in all of our work. I also use drawing a lot as a non-intimidating, non-competitive way to help architects that we work with. So this is giving them a choice between relating to the landscape as sort of quiet immersion or relating to the landscape with definitive interruption. Either would be fine. I really felt that in this case, but we were getting kind of arbitrary. It wasn't clear what was happening, and I could see that it was going to be kind of messy. And so I do these kinds of cartoons. I'm not drawing or designing architecture, but I'm trying to help the architects make a choice about how they relate to landscape. And these are all examples of this. Trying to move away from the bottom and try to see, architecture as part of a fabric. It always helps to do that. You'll never, I shouldn't say always or never, and I just said both. You generally won't have conflicts if you try to help with these things about helping the architecture fit into the landscape, and at the same time, you're gonna feel less worried that when you do present your landscape design to your architects, that it's gonna be this new dartboard, and instead, you guys are already on the same page with what some of the goals are. And so it's a friendly and genuine way to get some power and agency in the dialogue. So I'm going to do some quick 3 project examples of putting these kind of moments and mindset into action, I guess. So India Basin Shoreline Park, which is now known as India Basin Waterfront Park in San Francisco. You can see downtown San Francisco here. This is the Hunters Point Bayview neighborhood, and this India Basin part of the neighborhood has the highest percentage of Black children in this whole region, so not only in the city. And they, at the same time, have historically had the lowest percentage of open space and access to physical play and things like that. Phil Ginsberg, the current director of San Francisco Rec and Parks, is out to change that big time. And so there was a competition for this project on this polluted industrial waterfront. There was an old rundown park on this mitten part of the site, which is actually an old boat dump that some land was piled on top of. And then this is actually a neat old wooden boatyard. And then this basin is it's a mud flat when the tide goes out. It's pretty neat. But so when you look at this, it looks like an Italian hill town. It looks amazing. And then you can see, okay, this neighborhood that's full of families. It looks like, wow, look at these right-of-ways. People can just walk right down to the water. But this is what it looks like when you get close. There's no windows. This is public housing. There's not even windows facing the water on a lot of the units. And then the way to connect is either not there or it's chain linked off. I'm standing with our site behind us. There's a chain link fence behind me, which we just took down. I'm very excited about. So it's not what it could be. It would be so easy to make this better. So while the competition that we were responding to, the brief for it was to design a waterfront park that better connected north-south, so better connected along the waterfront, which is often the focus of waterfronts. When we went to visit the site, I was like, we're not going to win this competition, but we have to address this. This is the problem, not whether the waterfront park's going to be nice. I might have said it a little more weakly than that. I gained confidence over time. But this is what it looks like to try to cross the street. This happens with waterfront and also campus ring roads Two, since there aren't traffic warrants, because there's no roads that go into the water for vehicles, there's no safe crossings or controlled crossings here. There's a giant corner that cars go 50 miles an hour around, and few people feel safe crossing the street to get there. So we wanted to address that. We also wanted to be part of the horizontal levee initiative that the San Francisco Bay Institute had proposed at the time. This was in 2016 that we did this competition entry. So we basically said, okay, let's like soften the green edge. Like that's kind of a no-brainer in a way. It was like, let's take away as much riprap as we can, increase the surface area, bring more authentic nature contact and experience and more surface area into this neighborhood for these folks to experience. But then there's also this. This was the main kind of circulation program for the site, really emphasizing the north-south movement. The local movement is the little stuff that goes perpendicular to this. And regional trails are really important. Community trails are important. But I think that they distract us sometimes because they're so big. I notice that with bike lanes too. So I'm not anti any of these things, but I think that they get a disproportionate amount of attention, and we get false satisfaction in completing these regional things that often are for recreational fitness. I use them, and commuting, but not for local folks. So here's a picture more close up. You can see the chain linked off long fallow boatyard, and then this kind of worn down park with lots of riprap, and then the lack of safe crossings for the neighborhood that lives around this thing. Look at the one place that a painted crossing is. It's like the worst, right? The most blind spot, and where people are going 50 miles an hour around a corner. So here it is from the air. And then here's some crummy cartoons on printer paper that we tried to redo digitally, and ended up going back to the pencil crummy drafts. So this is the problem, very common problem. This is what we wanted. We said, okay, the park, this is all out of our scope, but we said the park has to be this somehow. It has to be reconnecting this disconnected and underserved neighborhood to the incredible asset that is at its feet and right across the street. So we looked to the history of the site for inspiration for form, not the macro history, but the post-colonization history. We have this beautiful, at least romantically looking back on it, a beautiful wooden boatyard that was here. This is our site. And there are these marineway rails that were about this sort of easy way to take advantage of the charismatic tide flat, shallow flux between water and land. So we started to think, well, what if we had something like that, like the park, like let's forget about like the solid green blob or whatever shape that's going to be, and start thinking about what is the interface for people. And maybe there's like a series of built elements that are ways for people, not wooden boats this time, to flux between water and land, home and shoreline. So that led to this concept diagram, which is totally not to scale, just, again, crummy printer paper, but thinking, what if then there were these wooden piers that were run down, but there are piers going out in the water, which are pretty exciting things that people couldn't get to. They were on the other side of a chain link fence. And we heard stories from people sneaking out there to just get to go on a pier. I mean, that's pretty exciting. So we thought, what if we had more of them? And then we pulled that all the way across the street and up the hill, and then that was the language for stairs, landings, and that the whole neighborhood then becomes the park is theirs, and you are reminded that you have access to the water when you step out your door or out the door of your building up the hill. So starting to explore that. One of the important first steps, and I was talking about this at lunch a little bit, was personally, I'm not talking about engagement meetings, but just personally spending time with the people in that neighborhood and giving people a chance to be on the place before it was improved, before we started any design. So there were a number of events that Trust for Public Land and Rec and Parks and APRI, who became our paid partners on the project, paid design partners, the Philip Randolph Institute, who are awesome, local community organization. They all put on these events. This was the Golden State Warriors like championship game of some sort, and I'm not very versed on that stuff, but it was really popular just to get people out there on the site. And then they kind of start to realize, well, this is part of my neighborhood, and it's not that far away. And then we heard so many stories about people sneaking in, people on the piers, people sliding down the hill on cardboard. So here's the site before. We also, as part of our design, and amazingly in San Francisco, there's enough NGOs and partners that this kind of stuff that's off the scope has been happening. I mean, it's just a dream come true. But we started looking at, there's this existing 1890s shipwright cottage here, and saying, what if we take that kind of like small activating module that is the historic grain and scale of that, should be their main street, and doing a little more of that. And so here's the shipwright's cottage and what the edge of the park looked like. This is just from like a couple months ago. We just opened the little first phase of the project, which is to get a series of these little active buildings and program pieces, being very careful, I'll talk about in a second, with the equitable development plan, that these are locally run or owned, incubated businesses. We can't completely prevent gentrification and that tension, which is a big issue in San Francisco. But we can make sure that what happens is employing local people and telling their stories as a start, and limiting stuff by scale a little bit too. So here's a picture, again, really recent. We had to dig out, we didn't do it, but we had to dig out all of this material and replace it because of the gas station that was on one of the piers. But you can see restoration of the shipwright's cottage. We added a very similar volume here, and then Jensen Architects executed on it it's called the food pavilion, but it incubates 3 to 4 at a time. There's a shared kitchen, and then there's counters with really amazing local artisans representing the neighborhood. And the equitable development plan that guided this is the first apparently in the world, I'm quoting Rec and Parks, that was an equitable development plan to guide one project, not a city, not an agency, but one project. So everything in this landscape architecture project, this park project, has to serve toward these goals. And a lot of it, I think the main shift for us has been the commitment to local economic, seeing the project as a mechanism, I guess, for economic and educational opportunity for local people, which we always talk about that being, but there's usually not a mechanism to make sure it happens. So here's a recent image. You can see the food pavilion, the shipwright's cottage, native plants. We collaborated with Rana on that. And then here, so this part of it still needs to be done, and some of these things still need to be done. But we worked really hard to preserve this one little piece of, it's the only non-dredged, non-walled, non-rip-wrapped piece of shoreline in all of San Francisco, down to Candlestick. And it's so small. But we did have to put back the historic piers. But here it is. This is the only do-de-do that I just said. It's so neat to have it on the site. And there's a nonprofit in here that teaches local kids to swim and teaches local kids how to build wooden boats. So it's bringing today together with the wooden boat heritage of the site. There were tensions when we started the project of, is this about wooden boat fetishizing, or is it about today's community and the needs of, who's here today, and bringing those two things together. It's just a dream come true. And I can't take credit for that. That's the really creative people in San Francisco. I wanted to talk for a second about planting design. I kind of avoided plants my mom was a gardener. I grew up in the boondocks, as you saw, but because of the early part of our project of work being very architecturally driven, and in an era, so the early 2000s was big D, minimalism, Audi, Gap, Apple, this like excitement about not dirt and plants. And then I needed to get back to what felt interesting to me. And meanwhile, I'm still doing hiking. And I got really interested, this is above my parents' place, in botanizing the clear cuts. And realized there's a bunch of plants that can come up in these clear cuts. It's like immaculate conception because they weren't there in the plantations before. But they come up in the harshest conditions, and they're beautiful, and they're not used horticulturally. But I started thinking, what if we use those in our urban projects that are in really tough situations? This is in downtown Seattle at the new Summit building, where we used some of those clear-cut plants in these planters, and they've been thriving. This is the first season. So these clear-cut plants are colonizers, so they're considered weeds. A lot of them are stoloniferous, so you're supposed to not use them in gardens. I don't believe that at all. I think gardens should look healthy and grown in. So we also did a series of gardens for mostly tech clients that are curious about doing things in a different way and kind of want to show that to other people. So that's great. And this garden was for really special clients who wanted, this is the first year. So we're using weed plants, and they wanted a garden. We were kind of joking about it first, and then they said, no, we want that. We call it the garden of poorly named plants, because they're all, the common name for these are hogweed, skunk cabbage, stink currant, all these kind of vengeful names that the European and American people named these plants as they saw them as weeds. This is the third year, and the clients wanted it like this. And it feels so healthy. And if you can imagine a typical garden that we would have done a few years before this, in the third year, it would look like mulch and miserably underscaled plants, waiting for right tree, right place, or whatever. And so we've been bringing that approach. This is Building X for Meta, which is actually Oculus virtual reality labs. I know you guys have one in the basement. And we've been working also on how do you tune the hardscape to be around planting like that so that the planting doesn't look like it's not supposed to be like that. So it's this almost lower resolution rendering of details than we, GGN, would have done a few years before with polished granite or wraparound corners and honed edges. Instead, we're purposely getting the contractors to do what we call bad concrete that's unsettled and looks ready to kind of feel like it's being colonized by nature. Again, this is clear-cut plant mix that is total self-education. And in our region, no one's using native plants. So it's total DIY if you want to do it. You got to test them yourself. You got to grow them from seed. You probably need to propagate them yourself. This is my son. And it's the same thing with ecology. You're going to find things in your career that you realize you run into, and you're like, I realize I don't know about this. So, and I kind of thought I knew about local ecology and native plants in my home region, but I really didn't. And there's not that many books that help you know, when I plant a ceanothus, what animals am I planting? What caterpillars go to that? So I think about 10 years ago, I started putting together my own kind of field guide of trying to understand this stuff, looking up anything I could find that I could get into the academic database sometimes to do that. And then my son, as you can see from the handwriting, my handwriting's bad, but not that bad. My son and I started growing these in our backyard. There he is. And in the first season that we started growing a bunch of the plants that I thought had promise in tough urban conditions, which the legend in Seattle is there's no plants native to the city. They all want to be in shade. That's such BS. That's not true at all. We just haven't been using them. So starting to grow these things from seed, and then I'm picky aesthetically, so trying to figure out how to make them look good. And it's totally possible. Like all the plants we use from other places have been made to look good because we've like figured out how to use them, right? Or to breed them. But then these insects, the bee wolf shown here, the great golden digger wasp, I had not seen them in my neighborhood that I had lived in for 15 years until we planted these plants. And all of a sudden, I had this like activity and more stuff to do, like learn about these insects, the sweat bees. And then I realized from my own little backyard patch, now I can say, okay, if you plant like an Erigeron or a Symphyotrichum, there's gonna be sweat bees on it at a certain time of year, and they have these school bus yellow pants and like the whole, like they're so cool. And then which bumblebees go on the lupin. It's like, oh, the lupins are like that because the bumblebees do squats on the bottom thing, and they open it up like a garage door, and it has like a dampening mechanism and slowly closes afterward. It's so freaking cool. So then I started like to be able to know more about this stuff. I started drawing these animals that were coming into our garden and getting to know them and getting to know them with my son. This is totally not landscape architecture in a way, but it rebooted my interest in what I do. Because I was like, to be honest, probably about 15 years in, it started to get a little familiar. We'd done a lot of plazas, we'd done a lot of museums, and just like totally changing scales, and I didn't even know what I was doing. But I started to get, these are, you know, the index cards, which does kind of sound like an insect. So these are quick. This is a butterfly that only lives on Thuya plicata, which is our native tree. So the other thing I did was, this is the backyard. I made it look so cozy and conventional, so nobody would think that like we did this. But I was out to prove like a conventional garden that most people in Seattle would think kind of looks like their garden or they'd want in their home. I mean, my brother built the shed, but I wanted something that looked like that with all native, and then to say it's all native plants. So then this, we had not done almost any residential, and then this turned into something that I really felt passionate about, and it doesn't make any money for the firm, you know, anything like that, but it totally rebooted me and gave me something to do with my hands, and something I didn't know anything about and was learning about. All these plants are grown from seed, by the way, all native through the seasons. And then this is the thing about, like, you still have to have really full edges and no bare dirt. And things should have, the plants should grow together in an even height. You can totally do that with any kind of plants, but you have to go through a few seasons with them to learn how to do it. One of my favorite plants, Heracleum maximum, which is never used in gardens and has a bad rap that's totally mythological, that it's poisonous. Some people are allergic to the sap if you cut it and like rub it into a wound. But it gets confused with Heracleum mantagazianum, which is the Russian one that's the monster that's invasive. So a group of us on Instagram have a group we call the Heracleum Appreciation Society, and you have Heracleum maximum here. It ranges across the continent. It's an ancient plant. Highly recommend it. So we started this thing called Meadow Shop at GGN that we thought we were going to do a bunch of little residences and do it really cheap and get like the mixes that I developed put in, but it's definitely been a loss leader. But it did enable us to do bigger projects with that work that I did in the backyard. This is the Gates Foundation Urban Habitat Meadow. This is Bellevue 600. We've been doing work at University of Washington to create some pilot meadow projects using Pacific Northwest meadow plants. There's a lot of annuals here. I use annuals as mulch rather than decomposed bark as mulch now. The little pink pom-poms are Plectritis. And that led into the last project I'll show you, which I will go very fast on, the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture in Seattle. Olson Kundig, the architects, and all native. There was a brief to have an ethnobotanical garden. We worked with Oxbow, who have a native plant nursery. We visited the University of Illinois, or no, not Illinois, of Idaho. And I put this in here because the role of universities in this project and plant propagation research was invaluable in enabling us to propagate 90,000 native plants from seed that weren't available in the trade. So the original idea was like, this is Washington State's Natural History Museum. We should show all of Washington State's plants in a labeled garden. But because the Burke had an idea of decolonizing the Natural History Museum, taking away from the focus on Western taxonomy and being more about real stories, our indigenous neighbors being involved, we said, okay, there's artifacts inside the museum and lots of interpretation. This is a crummy whiteboard sketch, by the way. It was just in a meeting. It was on a whiteboard. And the outside, we said, that's going to be a full color living landscape right now, and there might not be any labels, but it's going to be a real place with people in it that you can talk to and learn from, which seemed like a radical idea at the time. And then here's more of these crummy drawings, right? Not the top, but the bottom. Like, just draw out, this is what we don't want. We want this instead. And you can see it's like super crummy, but we used these a lot to remind ourselves of what we wanted to do. What we were inspired by, in particular, Camassia is a staple food and medicine plant that grows in sunny places. We had this huge sunny space. And the theme was ethnobotanical gardens. So we said, well, what if we did a landscape that's really about the connections and ancient agreements between people and plants in this region? And Camas is a great place to start. It was also where the European folks first unleashed their cows and pigs because they were burned openings in the forest. So unfortunately, most people, even a lot of our indigenous neighbors that were on the tribal council for this museum, had never seen a Camas plant. You can see them in bulk catalogs. They're from Holland, though. Formatting of the project, I won't talk about that much, but trying to create a new quad rather than seeing it as a sloped parking lot next to a building, like the backside of a building. We tried to create a center in the site, so we regraded it. Originally, we were going to use salvage brick for this central. We had to put parking in it. We had to keep the parking in. But we're thinking eventually this is definitely going to be, like, there's no way that this will stay a surface parking lot. So we put the bone structure in so that it's ready to plug and play. That white L-shaped piece of parking, a building can go there. And then the current asphalt, it of course got value engineered to asphalt. Here you go. That can easily be upgraded to become a pedestrian space. This is what it looks like. We really paid attention to paint, sharp corners, no radii. And then just, sometimes even when you have what seems like a pretty simple plan, if you just draft over it, you'll start to get more ideas. Here I was just refining the Camas seeding steps for the Camas meadow on the bottom there. This is the Camas meadow. All like super experimental. And the Polly Olson, who's Yakima tribal member, has been stewarding the ongoing caretaking of this. And it's been interesting to try to ward off the research people who want to look at this as a meadow to research. It's actually been our tribal collaborators who have said, this is a garden. This is a garden, and we're going to be creative with it, and we're going to touch it, we're going to harvest camas. People are part of this landscape. And that's a shift in worldview for me when I think of the idea of restoration work. I think it is for a lot of us, but it's also relaxing to realize we don't have to be perfect, and people can be involved in the landscape, and that is part of the landscape. We can relearn that. Here's the camas coming up. 15,000 camas bulbs grown from seed, which takes 6 years for them to grow, bloom like that. And there's some more pictures. This is Erigeron speciosus, which is just a darling cushion plant that should be in every nursery, but instead we have East Coast asters in our nurseries. And people in the landscape, which is a little bit of finally the dream of the Lurie Garden happening someplace else. So thank you for your patience. I went over time, which I was worried I was going to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. We probably have a couple minutes for questions if
anyone has the endurance.
Yeah.
great presentation.
Thank you.
Quick question, do you do much cooperative drawings in your office? Are other people around the table with you? Are you working interactively with a pencil, or is it kind of one person drawing and everyone's watching?
That's a really great question, especially because I mostly just showed my own drawings. And there's a catch-22 with that, because if I show other people's drawings, I worry that it seems like I'm taking credit for them. So other people in the office draw, I think, more than a lot of offices. We have a lot of people drawing, and I try to remind people to do that. My colleague David Malda is a machine and draws a lot of the stuff in the office. As far as cooperative drawing, we do try. It is so hard to remember to do it, but we try to, for every meeting, print something out and have it on the table, and then you inevitably have to draw on it because it's so much more efficient than just waving your hands or pointing at a screen. But it's easy to forget to do that. We do something every Thursday afternoon called Design Critters, where we put a drawing on the table of any project and all the design leads get together. And it's not even really a crit, like I don't think of it as that, but I like critical dialogue. So we put it down, and like whoever the design lead is on it will say, this is where I'm at, this is what we're working on right now, I'm trying this, but this isn't done yet. And then everybody else will there's no script. Everyone else will just kind of draw on it, or is this or this, and we get just like piles of trace. And it is, for a lot of us, the thing we value the most about our office is having that interaction and being able to hand draw in that conversation. People can communicate things that would be really hard to communicate in other ways. Like, why is this, like, sometimes someone will just like draw something, or they'll kind of shift something and then like do like 10 lines like this, and it's like, oh, thank God, you know, but it's like you can't really, I don't know how else you can do that. It's not pretty though.
Does this work? Okay. I thought you made a great point about there's not really good resources to understand the ecologies in some of these places. Like, you can't just find like a field guide to like your altered backyard habitat or whatever. And you've done such great work with your plants. Are you collecting that data in any way and using that like over the long term for other people to be able to use it, or is it still just exploratory? Or
I have not. Thank you. I have not done that. I am horrible at collecting or organizing anything after I'm in the moment of doing it. We've tried to make standardized plant mixes in the office that go off of all the like 7 years of trials I did in my backyard test beds. So we have those, but as far as the ecological connections, no, I have those sheets, but they're on all different disorganized things. They're not even all in one place, I have to admit. I did them more to kind of explore. And then, but that said, some newer books are coming out. It's mostly the West that's really behind. So Heather Holmes' Wasp book, oh my gosh, do any of you guys have Heather Holmes' Wasps book? It's so good because it lists the plants that are the host plants and the food plants for the wasps, which are different things. We like focus on pollinators, like what bug is landing on my flower? Like that's actually not that big of a deal. Like, but the plants that produce the larva are a big deal. Her book is exemplary of the kind of books we need as landscape designers. I would really love for her to do a West Coast book, but what I do is I look at that book, when that came out while I was doing those studies, and it was a miracle. But I look at that book for genus. Like the relationships are pretty similar in other regions, even if the species are different. So for instance, like Achillea and Sphex, because they do the same things. They've split off at some point, but they still catch tree crickets and put them in grass tubes, and stuff like that. So I work with what I can find, but I think what my point is, it's getting better. There are more and more books that you can find now that are available to the regular public people like us. Even over the last 10 years, it's gotten a lot better. Oh, that's good.
Oh, you're fine.
So I really like how you said that people are part of the landscape that you design. And I'm wondering, how do you facilitate public interest in your landscape so that people can be involved and manipulate that in the way that you envision? Is that like a public outreach or something?
So the way, you're so, I know. I would have tripped at least once by now if I was doing what you're doing. The way that we try to get people engaged is, well, okay, I'll tell you the way I try to, which is basically to show up and say, I don't know much about this place yet, but it seems really interesting. And then I might share a couple of things that I've found so far, or that I think are interesting about the place. And it might be a combination of, look how beautiful this, hillside is, and how unusual it is that you have this and this in your neighborhood. But there's this problem. And then maybe I'll share like some early site analysis of some stories that maybe I'm just like scratching the surface on. But then let people say whether they're interested in that or not. And then I think if we can start by learning about the place together before we show design, or before we ask people, what do you want to do here? I hate that. Like, sometimes we have to. But when we ask that question of ourselves too early, it writes over the chance to think really fresh about it and to start at a deeper place and to start together. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but waiting to ask people what they want to do, or even like what they think about a park, and starting more with the place together, I think for me, that's really work to get people engaged. And I'm not just saying like, oh, get them on your side or something, but like we'll really learn a lot from people, and then just feel like, oh, we know what feels right for this neighborhood if we feel like we've gotten to know the people and what they think about that place. So I think if you think of yourself as a host of a conversation and a learning process, like the project can be a space for everybody to learn about their community and the place, and like not feel so much pressure to come up with like what they want yet. That can help everybody be engaged. Oh, I did it again.
Oh, you're all good.
I should just walk around.
Oh.
I enjoyed the talk immensely, so thank you. First of all, the question I had was about the India Basin project in San Francisco. Are there other cities that are creating opportunities for creating green spaces for marginalized communities, for one? And for two, what is the chance that the gentrification that you mentioned will occur? Like, is that a real, okay, I'm going to design this beautiful space. Does that mean that that's going to make it a desirable area for people to to take over that area, more wealthy people, essentially?
On some level, it's going to raise real estate value. It's going to make that neighborhood more desirable. So that's there. And also, by the time we're brought in on something, somebody's noticed that place and there's funding, and then we're brought in to do the design. So that tells me it's already along the way. And so for instance, the India Basin design competition was partly funded by mitigation money from an adjacent developer that's developing, it hasn't happened yet, but develop a big kind of townhouse, like a whole new neighborhood really, that's next to our site, not up the hill from it, not the community we've been focusing on. So it's always part of the mix. And I do think there's hope in the equitable, if you guys get a chance to look up like India Basin Waterfront Park's equitable development plan, it is one really smart group, it doesn't include me, it's a smart group that said, can we find a way to hit the main things that need to be hit to resist gentrification and also replacement and displacement of a community that's getting a new park. And it's very specific to park and landscape, so that makes it really useful too. It's not going to be perfect yet. Everybody involved has said it's not going to be perfect. And some of it seems like stuff you already know, but it's all put down on paper and it was executed on. And then are other cities doing that? Totally. I think it's an exciting time to be a landscape architect because that's not only accepted that you're looking at that as part of your job, of understanding, well, why is the city like this? Why are the demographics like this? Why wasn't this area served? Or is the area I'm working in overserved? And why is that? And that is part of the story of that place. People accept you bringing those things up and including them in part of the story that is informing your design now. But one step beyond that, we are often seeing it in RFPs, that cities, agencies, communities all over want to understand that better and want a park to address it in some way.
Way to end, yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Shannon, for being here. Fantastic.